If you love someone with an addiction, there's a fair chance that someone has used the word codependent around you. Maybe directly, maybe gently, and maybe with the subtle warmth of a brick through a window. And sometimes that word can be useful. It can point to patterns that really do need attention, like overgiving, rescuing, monitoring, trying to control, or losing sight of your own needs. But here's where I want to slow this conversation down. Because not every woman who has become exhausted, hypervigilant, over-responsible, or consumed by someone else's addiction is acting from dysfunction. Sometimes she's using coping strategies that made sense in a situation that stopped making sense a long time ago. Sometimes what gets labelled as codependency is actually what survival looked like when love had to live beside instability, fear, broken promises, disappearing money, emotional whiplash, and repeated crises. So today I want to talk about codependency in a different way. And before we go further, if you haven't met me yet, I'm Megan Ruffino. I'm a coach, trainer, and the founder of Why Won't They Stop, where I support women who love someone with an addiction. My work is about helping you understand what addiction has done to your life, your nervous system, your relationships, and your sense of self, so you can begin making clearer, steadier choices without abandoning your love, your values, or yourself. I don't come to this conversation from theory alone. I come to it with professional training and lived experience and a deep respect for the women who have been holding families, relationships, and impossible situations together for far too long. So when I talk about codependency, coping, boundaries, rescuing, or overfunctioning, I'm not here to label you. I'm here to help you understand what you've been carrying and what may need to change now. So let's talk about codependency, not as a fixed identity, and definitely not as a character flaw, but as a set of patterns that may have started as strength, responsibility, loyalty, and practical coping, and may now need to be gently questioned because they are costing you too much. So what does codependency usually mean? The word codependency gets used a lot in addiction and recovery spaces. Generally, it describes a relationship pattern where one person becomes overly focused on another person's needs, moods, choices, problems, or behaviour, often while neglecting their own well-being. That might look like checking up on them constantly, trying to prevent the next disaster, covering for them, managing their responsibilities, smoothing things over, and trying to control how much they drink or use, trying to predict their moods before it shifts, and putting your own health, sleep, money, friendships, or peace last. And let's be honest, those patterns can become deeply exhausting. They can shrink your life. They can make your world revolve around someone else's instability. And they can turn you into a full-time crisis manager in a job you never applied for. But the important question is not only what are you doing, it's also how did this become the thing that you learned to do? Because behaviour without context is a very blunt instrument. And women who love someone with an addiction have often had their behaviour judged without enough attention to the environment that shaped it. Coping strategies can look like control from the outside. One of the common criticisms of codependent behaviour is that the person is trying to control everything. And sometimes, yes, control becomes part of the pattern. But control is not always where the story began. Sometimes the story began with being lied to, with money missing from the account, with promises that sounded sincere but then collapsed by Friday night, with children needing dinner while the other adult in the house was unreliable, and with waiting for the car to come in the driveway, with listening for the sound of the key in the door, with noticing the tiny changes in their voice that told you that the evening was about to go sideways. From the outside, checking can look obsessive, but from the inside it can feel like trying to gather enough information to keep yourself, your family, your home, or your sanity steady. That does not mean constant checking is good for you. It usually isn't. It wears you down, it keeps your nervous system on high alert, and it rarely gives you the control or certainty you're hoping for. But it may have started as intelligence, as pattern recognition, as your body and mind saying, last time I missed the signs, things got worse, so now I'm going to notice everything. And that's not a character defect, that is adaptation. The problem is that adaptation can become a cage. Hypervigilance, that word is so tricky. Hypervigilance is not the same as being dramatic. A woman living alongside addiction may become highly tuned to small details. The tone of voice, facial expression, how long they've been gone, whether the bank balance has changed, whether the story makes sense, whether the bottle is where it was yesterday, and whether the apology sounds different this time. And people may say, you're too suspicious, or you're always looking for something, or why can't you just let it go? But hypervigilance doesn't appear out of thin air. It often develops when the world has repeatedly taught you that relaxing is not safe. If someone has been honest and reliable for years, you usually don't feel the need to monitor them. But when your trust has been repeatedly shaken, your nervous system may start scanning for danger before your conscious mind is even caught up. Again, that doesn't mean the scanning is helping you now. It may be draining the very life out of you. But it probably began as a protective strategy, a strategy built from experience. So the question is not, what is wrong with me for noticing everything? The better question is, what has happened that has taught me I needed to? And then, is this strategy still protecting me, or is it now consuming me? Overfunctioning often begins because someone else stopped functioning. Another pattern, often described as codependent, is overfunctioning. This is when one person carries more than their share of the emotional, practical, financial, or family load. And in relationships affected by addiction, this can become enormous. You may be the one paying bills, managing appointments, remembering school events, keeping the peace, explaining things to relatives, protecting children, cleaning up messes, making decisions, finding treatment options, checking insurance, arranging transport, and quietly holding the whole structure together with emotional duct tape and a prayer. And yes, over time that can become unhealthy. It can train the other person to carry less and can leave you depleted. And it can make it harder to know what is truly yours and what belongs to them. But again, context matters. Overfunctioning often begins because there's a gap that someone has to fill. The electricity bill does not care that there is addiction in the home. The children still need care. The rent still needs paying. The pets still need feeding. The world does not pause because one adult has become unreliable. So what begins as an emergency response slowly becomes the structure of the relationship. You carry more because things need carrying. And then you keep carrying more because you're frightened of what will happen if you put anything down. That may need to change. But it deserves to be understood before it is judged. You may not have become indispensable because you needed to be needed. You may have become indispensable because you were left holding what two people were meant to carry. And rescuing can be more complicated than it looks. Yes, so let's talk about rescuing, because this is one of the big ones. People might tell you, stop rescuing them. Let them face the consequences. And sometimes that's good advice. Sometimes constantly stepping in does shield the other person from reality. Sometimes paying the debt, making the excuse, cleaning up the mess, or smoothing things over allows the pattern to continue for longer. But this is where we need to be grown-ups about the complexity. Consequences do not always land neatly on the person who caused them. If the rent doesn't get paid, the children may lose their home too. If the car is gone, the whole household may lose transport. If they lose their job, the family income may collapse. If they create a public disaster, the shame and fallout may land on everyone. So when a woman steps in, she may not be trying to protect the addiction. She may be trying to protect the family from the blast radius. That doesn't mean rescuing is always the right choice, but it does mean the choice is often more complicated than outsiders make it sound. Sometimes she's not choosing between a good option and a bad option. She's choosing between several bad options and trying to reduce the damage. That's not simple codependency. That's triage. And if you've been living in triage for too long, it makes sense that you're tired. The strategy may have worked until it didn't. This is the part I really want to land. Many of these patterns started because they worked, at least in some way. Checking gave you information. Overfunctioning kept the household moving. Rescuing prevented immediate disaster. And managing emotions reduced conflict. Anticipating problems helped you prepare. And staying alert helped you survive the next crisis. These were not random behaviours. They were strategies. They were the best tools you had at the time. And for a while, they may have helped you hold things together. The issue is that a strategy can be useful in one season and harmful in another. A raincoat is useful in a storm, but if you kept wearing it every day under a hot summer sun, eventually it becomes unbearable. Some of your coping strategies may have helped you get through the worst of things, but now they may be taking more from you than they are giving back. They may be costing you your sleep, your health, your peace, your confidence, your sense of self, your ability to feel joy, and your ability to make decisions that are about your life, not only about their addiction. And that's where the work begins. Not with shame, not with self-attack, but with a clear, honest question. Is this still helping me? A more useful way to question the pattern. Instead of asking, am I codependent, as though you're trying to diagnose your whole identity, I think there are better questions. Questions that are more practical, more compassionate, and frankly, more useful. You might ask, what have I learnt to do to keep things functioning? What am I afraid will happen if I stop doing it? Which responsibilities are truly mine? And which responsibilities have I picked up because someone else keeps dropping them? What am I doing from love? What am I doing from fear? And what is protecting genuine safety? And what is trying to control something I cannot control? What is this costing me? And what support would help me respond differently? These questions still ask you to look honestly at your behaviour. They still invite change, but they don't begin by turning you into part of the problem. They begin by helping you understand the system you've been living inside. And when you understand the system, you can begin to make different choices. Not perfect choices, not magical choices, but steadier ones. You can honour the strength and still change the strategy. Here's the balance. You do not have to hate the part of you that coped. You don't have to look back at that version of you who checked and helped and rescued and overgave and stayed awake and managed, planned, pleaded, researched, and carried everything and call her foolish. She was trying. She was loving. And she was adapting. And she was responding to pressure. She was doing the best she knew how with what she had in front of her. There is strength in that. There is loyalty in that. There's endurance in that. And there is fierce, practical love in that. But strength without rest becomes depletion. Love without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. And responsibility without limits becomes resentment. And coping without reflection becomes a life you did not consciously choose. So the invitation is not to condemn yourself. The invitation is to pause, turn towards your own life again and ask, what needs to change now? Because you're allowed to stop living in emergency mode. You are allowed to keep the wisdom your coping gave you and lay down the parts that are now too heavy to keep carrying. If this has stirred something in you, if you can recognize some of these patterns and you're starting to wonder what belongs to you, what doesn't, and what might need to change, I'd love to invite you to start with the list. The list is my free training for women who love someone with an addiction. It will help you begin sorting through what you can control, what you can't control, what you may have been carrying, and how to start finding steadier ground without abandoning your care, your values, or yourself. You can find it at whywon'ttheystop.com. Start there. Start gently. Start with understanding. Because some of your strategies may have helped you survive, but now you deserve strategies that help you live. If this video helped you see the word codependency a little differently, please like it, subscribe, or share with someone who may need a more compassionate and honest way to understand what they've been carrying. And remember, you are allowed to honour the strength that got you through, and you are allowed to choose something different for the road ahead.